What's up guys, my name is Ace, and welcome back to another gun guide. This is the series where I go into great detail with all of the stats of every one of the weapons in Modern Warfare. And in today's episode, we're moving on to the M91 LMG. Now the M91 has a base damage profile of 3128, which is pretty standard for LMGs. However, we do get an upper torso multiplier, which takes our damage to 3430, meaning if you are hitting those upper torso shots, this will be a 3 to 4 shot kill. If you are shooting them in the stomach or the arms or the legs though, this will be a 4-shot kill at all ranges. As for headshots, we get a 1.49 times headshot multiplier, which means up close headshots are pretty much irrelevant. You're never going to get a 2-shot kill with this with headshots. However, in those longer range situations, it can take it from a 4-shot kill down to a 3-shot kill. Our rate of fire is 674 rounds per minute, which isn't quite the slowest in the LMG category. It's a little bit faster than the SA-87, but I also wouldn't call this a fast rate of fire by any means, so it isn't really the most forgiving gun if you're consistently missing several shots. As for our theoretical minimum time to kill, this is 178 milliseconds in the 3-shot kill range, which is a great time to kill, and then it drops off to 267 milliseconds if it's a 4-shot kill. Now having a look at the ranges, as you can see here, our 3-shot kill range extends out to about 44 meters, which is a very solid 4-shot kill range. It's pretty standard for LMGs, but most of the time on like 6v6 maps for instance, you're going to be well within that 3-shot kill range. As for suppressors, the lightweight suppressor will reduce this range by 25%, so I definitely recommend staying away from that unless you're playing hardcore. And the monolithic suppressor will increase this range by just 7.5%. Speaking of hardcore, the M91 will be a 1-shot kill anywhere in the body out to 44 meters, and then beyond 44 meters, you can still get a 1-shot kill to the upper torso or the head, but if you're shooting them anywhere else in the body, it will be a 2-shot kill. When it comes to hipfire, as you can see here, it's not really great in this department. It's the same as the PKM and the MG34, and like I said, it's just not very good. You generally don't want to be hipfiring unless you're basically at point blank range. This brings us into idle sway, and as you can see here, it's got very little idle sway. It moves a very small amount, and it also moves very slowly with this, and therefore this gun is great for hitting those longer range shots. Something else that goes into that though, of course, is recoil, and as you can see here, I just shot about 30 rounds per recoil test. I'm not going to fire the full 100 round magazine. But you can see here that it kicks pretty much straight vertically, and then it kind of zigzags a little bit on its way up. And what this means is typically if you are going to be looking at attachments to reduce your recoil, you want to focus mainly on the ones that help with recoil stabilization rather than recoil control. Because recoil stabilization has to do with that side-to-side sort of recoil, and you want to control that as much as possible because the vertical recoil is really easy to handle on your own. Now moving on to our handling stats, our aim down sight time is extremely slow at 450 milliseconds, and this is one of the biggest downsides to this gun. When you look at the average time to kill of most guns in this game, it's roughly 200 milliseconds, so people can kill you literally twice before you even get aim down sight with this gun. And that goes to show that this is a very big problem that you want to try to combat with attachments. As for our sprint out time, this is also fairly slow, but it's not too bad when you consider the aim down sight time. The standard sprint out time is 334 milliseconds, and the tactical sprint out time is 467 milliseconds. Now getting into our magazine capacity, this is very good at 100 rounds with another 100 in reserve. However, in exchange for that, our reload time is extremely slow. Our standard reload time is 6.09 seconds, which is almost as slow as the PKM, which is the slowest in the game. However, you can cut this down very considerably with sleight of hand. You can cut this all the way down to 3.64 seconds, which is an unbelievable improvement, although at the same time, with that 100-round magazine, you don't necessarily need sleight of hand. That's really just up to you. This brings us into movement speed, and our movement speed is fairly standard for LMGs at 89%, and our aim down sight stray speed is also pretty standard for LMGs and very slow at just 36%. So that almost covers it for all of the important base stats that you need to know about the M91. However, of course, there's one really important factor to consider here, and that is the fact that this has an open bolt design, and the way it's actually designed in game to mimic that is there is a slight delay after pulling the trigger before the gun will actually fire. And since this delay is so small, it's very difficult to measure with perfect accuracy. There's a lot of inconsistencies when you're looking at that, but I did my best to try and test this, and it looks like this delay could be as much as about 100 milliseconds. Which in Call of Duty terms, that is a very large delay. Like I said, the average time to kill for a lot of guns up close is just 200 milliseconds, so roughly half of that time is just going to be a delay after you pull the trigger before the gun actually goes off. So this is another pretty big downside that you have to factor in when looking at the stats of the M91. But now that we finally have that covered, it's time to move into some of the unique attachments that this gun has, and first up we're going to kick it off with the barrels, and the first barrel we have access to is the Special Forces barrel. With this one, we get an increase to our damage range, which is about a 20% increase, which is a nice boost for sure, and it also helps with our bullet velocity, which will make it a little bit easier to hit those targets at longer ranges, especially when they're moving. Now, the only downside to this is you lose some of that aim down sight speed. Instead of 450 milliseconds, it's now 500 milliseconds, which is just ridiculously slow. This is a pretty big punishment for using this barrel, and honestly, since the aim down sight time is already so bad, using this barrel just isn't an option for me. I would stay away from this. As for the second barrel you unlock with this is the infantry barrel, and this one helps with your aim down sight time, and it's a pretty decent improvement. You get a roughly 2 frame improvement at 60 FPS, so your new aim down sight time is 417 milliseconds, which, keep in mind, that's still very slow, but at least it is an improvement. And on top of that, it does improve our movement speed by about 1%. As for the cons on this, it says that it reduces your bullet velocity, which actually reduces your damage range by about 10%, which isn't so bad. It's definitely something you can deal with. And on top of this, we do lose a little bit of recoil control with this barrel, which, if we have a look at this recoil pattern and the side-by-side with the base recoil, you can actually see that it looks like there's a bit less side-to-side recoil. That's just because it's not being compressed downwards quite as much, so it's free to kick upwards a little bit more, but really, it's not so bad at all. I wouldn't consider this to be a significant downside by any means. So overall, I highly recommend the infantry barrel. Now finally for barrels, we have the M91 heavy barrel, and with this one, we once again get a 20% increase to our damage range, just like the Special Forces barrel. And again, we get an increase to our bullet velocity, which is great for hitting those moving targets at longer ranges. But an extra benefit we get with this barrel compared to the first one is an improvement to our recoil control, which once again, if we have a look at the side-by-side right here, honestly, I don't really see much of a difference at all. It honestly seems like this barrel has a pretty negligible impact on your overall recoil control. And these upsides do come at the cost of a slower aim down sight time, so just like with the Special Forces barrel, it's going to be a 500 millisecond aim down sight time, which is 3 frames slower at 60 FPS, and that is extremely slow. And on top of that, our overall movement speed is reduced by 1%. So just like with the Special Forces barrel, I don't recommend this barrel either. I just don't think the upsides on this barrel justify that really slow aim down sight time that you get with it. Now moving on to the next set of unique attachments, we have extended mag attachments on this, and the first one is the 120 round belt. And with this, it states that it reduces your aim down sight speed as well as your movement speed. And unlike the extended mag attachment on a lot of other guns, you do actually see a little bit of a reduction to your aim down sight speed. It'll be 1 frame slower and therefore 467 milliseconds to aim down sight with the 120 round belt. On top of that, our movement speed is reduced by 1% while using this. Now, in addition to the 120 round belt, we also have access to a 150 round belt. And this actually has the exact same impact to your aim down sight time, so it will be 1 frame slower at 60 FPS. However, it does harm your movement speed a little bit more. You will be overall 2% slower with this. And with that, that finally covers it for all of the important things you need to know about the M91 LMG. Now let's move into some great attachment combinations as well as example class setups. And the first setup that I have for you guys, this one is designed a bit more around aggression. Even though it's an LMG, you can be somewhat aggressive with it with the right attachments. And with this, we've got the infantry barrel, we've got the no stock attachment, and both of these combined give us a much more respectable aim down sight time. Also stippled grip on there, which will help a bit more with our aim down sight time as well as our sprint out time. Our perk is going to be FMJ because if the enemy does call in like a VTOL or something, you can take it down really quickly with FMJ on this, which is great. And finally, for our underbarrel attachment, we're using the Commando foregrip to cut down a little bit on that side-to-side bounce. This is a great attachment setup, however, the downside to this is it will take quite a long time to unlock all of these attachments. A lot of the attachments that improve your aim down sight speed are unlocked quite a bit later on, and that does kind of suck with the M91. But taking that into an example class setup, we've got the 1911 as our secondary, EOD for perk 1, Hardline for perk 2, and Tune-Up for perk 3 because I want to get Dead Silence as often as possible with this particular setup. On top of that, we've also got a Frag Grenade as our lethal, and our tactical will be a Stim Shot. With this particular setup, I like to treat it more like an assault rifle than an LMG, although I do have to be aware that I will still be a bit slower than assault rifles, and also our aim down sight time is still going to be slower than all of the assault rifles in the game. As for our next attachment combination, this one is much more designed to be a proper LMG class setup. With this, we're using the TAC laser, which is going to help a little bit with our aim down sight time, but also our aiming stability, which is great. Also, we do have the GI mini reflex as our optic. I really like this optic if I'm going to use one. I think the iron sights are great on this gun, but since this setup is designed for longer range engagements, it is helpful to have some form of an optic on it. As for our stock, we've got the XRK Stalker, which is the one that helps with our aim down sight speed, which is excellent combined with the TAC laser because even if you're hanging back at longer ranges, you still want to improve that aim down sight time because it's so slow with this gun. For perk, once again, we've got FMJ, so we can take out enemy streaks a lot easier, and we can also punch through walls, so if an enemy gets behind a thin piece of cover, you can just keep spraying and finish them off. And finally, once again, we've got the Commando foregrip to cut down on that side-to-side bounce with our recoil. And taking this one into an example class setup, this one is designed for the ground war game mode, and with this we've got the Desert Eagle as our secondary, EOD for perk 1, Kill Chain for perk 2 because we're going to be hanging back, picking people off, and this will often allow us to get our streaks, and then those streaks can chain to the next streaks, which is great. Shrapnel is our tier 3 perk combined with Thermite, so we can take out enemy tanks really easily, especially with FMJ also on our gun. This is great. And finally, we have a Stim Shot as our tactical. This particular setup is excellent for just hanging back and completely shutting down lanes. As long as you're set up nicely and already aiming, people are going to have a very hard time pushing through the lane that you're watching. And with that, that finally wraps it up for today's gun guide on the M91. As for my thoughts on this LMG, I do think it's definitely better than the SA87, and if you do treat it properly like an LMG and you basically just hang back and lock down a lane, this gun is excellent. However, it is not a very versatile weapon. That open bolt delay is very difficult to deal with, especially if you're trying to be a bit aggressive. And also, like I mentioned earlier, all of the attachments that help with your aim down sight time are unlocked a little bit later on, and therefore the initial struggle with this LMG was quite rough. Having said that though, once you get it up to a certain level and you get some solid attachments for it, it definitely performs a lot better than the early levels. And with that, I'd like to know in the comment section below, what do you guys think of the M91 LMG? Do you think it's a good LMG, bad LMG, or just kind of mediocre? Just let me know those thoughts in the comment section down below. If you guys have missed any of the previous episodes of Gun Guides, we're really moving our way through this now, which is great. We've got all of the assault rifles and SMGs, as well as a bunch of other guns already covered. I will, of course, leave a link to the playlist for that in the description down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.